Oh, yeah, welcome to the Remori Podcast number 4. This is actually the second take on this. I've already recorded almost an hour, and the footage did not work. For some file format reason, I was not able to upload it, so here we go, take 2. All right, anyways, hey, this is all about the idea of bending and not breaking, or bend, don't break. Now, these podcasts are typically related to a newsletter that I write every Monday. It's like an essay format that goes into probably a more polished, in-depth look at this, but we're going to talk about it today. So this whole idea is kind of came from thinking about skyscrapers and the fact that they're so strong and structurally sound and designed that you think they're very rigid and tough and unmoving, but they're actually flexing with the wind. Like some of the tallest towers move up to like 6 to 8 feet at a time, swaying at the top because of the wind. So really there's a lot more strength in being able to be flexible and adaptable than there is just holding tight and rigid. And we're going to look at this in a lot of different situations, but the way we're going to look at this is in the sense of core values and non-negotiables. The idea of a core value is one of those where you have the why or purpose of something that's like a driving force, so that it can really shape shift and look differently, and the process might be different as long as it's kind of reaching towards that core value or rooted in that core value. And the break part is non-negotiables, to where it's like at some point you're going to draw a line, and no matter what, we're not going to cross these boundaries, right? So really, I started this when I took over a new position at a campus that I'm working on, to where I'm trying to set up our first meeting, and I'm trying to think about the verbiage we want to use and really defining our mission and making sure we have core values that drive that mission. And at some point you have to draw non-negotiables, meaning no matter what's going to happen, we're not going to cross certain lines. And it's almost always in, safety and ethics. And there we go. All right. It's going great. This is super easy to podcast and do all this stuff. All right. But anyways, I was going to Test. Okay. Technical difficulties. It has been tough. All right. So anyways, getting into this new campus, I'm trying to come up with this verbiage that's going to drive us, right? And some of the core values are going to be like, hey, we're going to have a growth mindset. So no matter what we do, when we're driving our mission to educate and love kids and to prepare them for their future, we're going to be have a growth mindset. So we want to instill it in our teachers and myself and the kids, that everyone on that campus walking in those hallways is going to have a growth mindset. And one of those is for an accountability check when we're having meetings, right? So if there's opportunities for professional development for me to get better, I have to have that mindset that I'm ready to go learn and bring it back to my campus. Same thing if I expect my teacher, same thing if a teacher expects a kid or a coach expects a kid to. Another one might be one of ours is going to be flexible, to where it's like, hey, we're going to adapt with whatever life is going to push us, whatever the TEA and say it's going to push us. We're going to be flexible and still perform our mission no matter what, hurdles we have to jump. So I'm really starting to drive the idea of these core values from a company or organizational standpoint, which there's so many books on that. I mean, that's not a new concept by any means. But really, I think it's going to be clarity with mission first. So like, what are we here to do and how are we going to do it? Where are we willing to flex and give, and where are we going to draw the line and have those non-negotiables? So typically there's entire books and classes written on this for companies. And if you follow all the guys like Simon Sinek and all those people, that's what they're going to be talking about, right? But I think it's interesting to apply this concept to our own personal lives. And I think a lot of times we can do it and apply these concepts easier from an organizational standpoint than you can like your own family. So like as a family, what's going to be our mission statement as a family? What's going to be, the core values that drive us, and what are the ways that we're going to flex and bend for each other, for society, for business, for schedule, for culture, and where are we going to draw that line at? I think it's really important to at least have those discussions and think about that, because I think without intentionality and planning, it's easy for it to be, pushed to the side, and all of a sudden you're like, man, why did we even start doing this? We don't even like this. Nobody in our family is enjoying it. It's not bringing us closer, and it's not bringing us closer to God. We're not doing any of this, yet we've drifted into this area, right? So from the family standpoint, then also from the personal standpoint of like, do you know what your purpose is? Do you know what your mission is? Do you know the bottom line every day of the mission you need to be operating on, right? Or operating in? And I think that is one of those to where if you don't have that clearly defined, once again, you start drifting. And if you start drifting and your actions aren't intentional and driven to get to that mission, whatever that mission is, it's going to start being a problem. And we're going to look at both sides of the spectrum of being kind of too rigid, like those skyscrapers that don't budge, that eventually collapse and crack, versus being so flexible, you have no structural integrity, right? Or strength. So we're going to look at both sides of that. But in the personal life, we kind of see especially I think in my age group, which is kind of I would say the younger millennials, you've seen this like grind set of so much discipline, dial the discipline up to 1,000% and just grind. And I think there's actually a lot of positives to that. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about, from the business standpoint. A lot of times we see businesses and companies do this because it worked well for them for a little while. So one example I use in the newsletter is thinking about those companies who have created a model that works really well, but they're so rigid in that model, they never really adapt or change to the times. And it's going to be Blockbuster, right? And I'm aging myself if you're younger and listen to this, but it's Blockbuster. Like you want to go walk into Blockbuster, rent out a movie, rent out a game, keep it for a week and bring it back next Friday, right? So they did that. They did it very well. They were very, very profitable. But when times started changing and the rise of Netflix and the rise of internet and streaming, they actually had some opportunities to I think it was partner with Netflix or buy Netflix or get onto a platform for the internet, but they didn't. They were rigid. They didn't budge. They didn't flex. They didn't adapt. And what happens is they eventually that led to their downfall, right? So this applied to our personal life, I think, is if you're so rigid in, let's just say, even think something's kind of positive, like you're disciplined to work out and eat healthy and never miss a workout and never eat a carb or a dessert, whatever you want it to be. Was it in Step Brothers? Like, I haven't had a carb since 2003 or whatever it is. But being so rigid and disciplined that you can't enjoy the little things in life. So if your friends say, hey, do you want to, go out and grab a bite, and you say no because they don't really get anything healthy on the menu, or you're trying to meal prep and you're wondering if they can microwave your food or whatever it is when you get there, just something ridiculous, right? Or maybe you skip a trip because the trip is going to mean a week long without our state-of-the-art gym nearby, or being able to meal prep and keep your stuff in the fridge. Like, if you're so rigid in your discipline that you're missing those moments, I mean, I think it's obvious that you're not being flexible or adaptable enough. But I think also from the mental perspective and the mental side of things, this is where I've struggled, because there's a time where I had to kind of run every day and I had to work out every day. And if I didn't, I almost had like a little bit of anxious thoughts and anxiety, and I struggled with it. And I felt like I was failing. And there was an element of like, yes, I was so disciplined at a point where I was working out and training consistently, but that was almost like a pacifier to the real problem. Like, yeah, I wasn't, nothing was wrong, but I still had a pacifier. The pacifier is what's, keeping me from having those bad or awful feelings. It's not really my ability to control myself and my emotion in those moments, right? So anyways, going to being rigid and then being flexible, the other side of that is if you don't have enough discipline and you're too flexible to where every opportunity you have to skip a workout or skip a meal, a healthy meal, or to cheat and have the candy or whatever it might be, that also becomes a problem, because you have no structural integrity of a base to work with. And the business side of things, when you see people who are so flexible and they never adjust, and they're always chasing what's next and the new fad and this and that, they don't ever stick with anything consistently when it's difficult. Those are the businesses you don't hear about that fail too. So the spectrum is so flexible, you have no structural integrity, which probably leads to never building anything great, to so much discipline and so much being so rigid that you do something so well and you get so tight and hung up on it, you don't flex or adapt. You start having cracks and stress fractures, and then eventually collapse of some way or another. So in this idea of bend, don't break, you really do have to be able to answer the question of what is the overall mission, and does being rigid and disciplined at this time help, or does being flexible and missing it? So for example, like for me, I'm trying to be, a good and faithful servant, the best husband I can be, the best father I can be, the best friend that I can be, like to be the best version of myself to serve others, essentially. So some of that is, do I need to be disciplined and trained and healthy for longevity for my kids? Yes. Is that everything? Absolutely not, right? So if it's one of those to where I'm missing really quality time with my kids just to go for a 16-mile run or whatever it might be, then there is a problem there. And I actually fell into that, and it was for a short season. It wasn't sustainable. But me and my 3 older brothers ran an ultra marathon, which was about 32 miles, and like we've all kind of been runners, but going to that extreme was pretty tough because even most of my runs were 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, doing 10, 12 miles out on the county roads, just so I didn't miss time with my girls. It was still taxing and difficult. And there was times where I did have to, sacrifice some time. So I really had to define, like, hey, is this part of my life really making me the best version of myself that I can be? And to some degree it was, but not all of it. So there was time to kind of flex and change and adjust of like, hey, is this actually making me the best version of myself to serve others, starting with, God, my family, that's the question, my mission statement. The core values is going to be, faith. And really with faith, I would say it's not even like a core value. Like it's not like the number one thing I'm going to do. It's part of everything that I do. There's a really good, I can't remember who said it. It might've been Matt Chandler, but he said, don't prioritize. Like if you're making a list of what's important in your life, God shouldn't be number one. God should be the paper you write on, or the faith should be the paper you write on. So your entire list of whatever you're going to prioritize is already have a foundation of Christ, of your faith. And that's a better way to look at it, especially when you're talking about, hey, when do I flex? When do I not? When do I hold rigid to discipline? And when do I not? So getting into, that as well, we do have to make sure that, the core values are what's going to define. We're like, hey, health is a really important one to me. Fitness is an important one. Health and fitness is, but it's not everything. When it comes to my kids, I want to make every event possible. I want to be really good, whatever event it might be, but I also want to be really good at my job and my work, because that's how I'm going to support them. And that's how I want them to, be proud of what I'm doing at the school and the hallways. Right. So there's areas where you do have to make sure you're balancing and structuring these in a way that makes sense, but also not in a way where you're going to prioritize the how over the why. Of like, hey, no matter what, I have to do this, this, and this. Well, anytime you say no matter what, or paint yourself into a corner, you're probably doing something wrong, and you're probably going to miss the big picture or miss the forest for the trees. So, and when it comes to, another way to look at this is a good buddy of mine was telling me about, you were talking about kind of mission and vision and what we're trying to build on our campuses. Make sure my mic's on, because that would have been bad. As he is out of McMahon, we did our first, I think, Remori podcast with him on there. We're talking about Kaizen, the art of getting better each day, and the Misogi, the event of doing something big and scary to challenge you and grow you. That's the first podcast. But he was talking to me. He's like, trying to sell a vision. There's a story or a parable, or really just a story, not a parable, but a story where this man was going through this company that created and sold drill bits. And he would ask, an employee, hey, what do you do here? Like, we make, the best drill bits you can buy. And then he asked like a salesman, hey, what do y'all do here? Hey, we make the absolute best drill bits that you can purchase. And you ask the builder or the engineers, like, we design the best absolute drill bits that you can buy. And he went through the entire company, and everybody was saying the same thing. He got to the CEO, and he said, we find the most efficient way to drill holes. And the distinction there is the process, the how over the why. So, or the purpose, the mission statement, meaning we're not making drill bits. If there's better ways to make a hole, whether it's laser technology or whatever it might be, that's what we're doing. That's the mission statement. But it's so easy to get caught up in the why, especially not the why, get in the how and the process. And that's, you start talking about public education of like mission statement versus, what are we actually doing here? That kind of that's a pretty hot topic. And I could probably have another podcast just on that alone, to where I think sometimes we get distracted by trivial things on the how or the process versus why we actually doing what we're doing. But once again, for another time. Now, another place we're going to talk about that is going to be in our faith. And I mentioned faith a second ago, but I'm looking at it from a couple different perspectives. We're going to talk about faith from the church body standpoint of bending and flexing, and also the personal faith point of bending and flexing. So when we get to the church, and I'm going to be careful here, and I'm not it's not about attacking any kind of denomination or any type of church. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is trying to give us a lens of discernment when we're looking and deciding churches and how we plan to serve in that church. So that's what I want to begin with. This really makes me think of a point of we've all seen churches, I feel like, that are so fundamental and traditional on the how they do things that they miss the bigger picture, right? And what we see Jesus saying, like, hey, here's the mission statement, here's the why, is actually in the Gospel of Matthew, which is the guy that followed him around, firsthand account of recording everything that he did. There was a situation where a Pharisee, which is a really religious elite person, more likely described as a hypocrite at different times, even by Jesus himself, was trying to trap Jesus and kind of trick him into a question while he was teaching. And this Pharisee, the religious guy, said, hey, teacher, talking to Jesus, which is the greatest commandment of the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. So that's a mission statement of, hey, that is what we are designed to do. That is what you're supposed to do. That is the commandment I'm telling you to keep. And the second most important. And in that answer right there, people who love the process over the why, or love the how over the why, get frustrated because they want a yes or no answer, a checkbox, what's something they can wield over others. Because the Pharisees at the time, they, like talking about being so rigid, they came to power and authority by understanding Torah law, which is the first 5 books of the Bible in the Old Testament, and using that and wielding that in a very, very rigid way. Well, Jesus is still fulfilling the law, but it's not the exact way that they expected and wanted them to. He was going to be known as the Messiah, the Son of God, who come and free the Jewish people from the world, essentially. But they were frustrated because it didn't fit the mold that they wanted. Now, where we see this today, and sometimes it's even trying to mean well, but it just doesn't work out, as we see it in churches, the most, when we're so rigid on the how or even the process instead of the why, we see so many churches split up over things like the type of music you're going to play, the dress code, what baptism should look like, how many songs are going to play, just stuff where you're like, we're missing the big picture here. And a lot of that is also maybe even like dress code, and a big part of that is, if we're more concerned on those things and then loving others as ourselves, or loving the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, we're missing the picture. Now, the other side of the spectrum is going to be too flexible. And when I mean flexible, I mean we're trying to be rooted in Scripture and exactly what it says, but we're also being flexible and adaptable based on what we're operating in, the world we're operating in. And what that means is everything's not going to look the exact same as it did a couple thousand years ago, right? It's going to look different. But when you start adjusting and adapting and being so flexible with the world, that becomes a problem as well, because worldly does not mix with the word, all right? Those are two different issues there. And it even says in the Bible, do not be conformed by the patterns of the world, right? But be transformed by the renewing of your mind in Christ, right? So when it talks about that, we see churches that are more concerned with appeasing man than appeasing God. And what I mean by that is we're trying so hard to give the people what they want, essentially, where it's going to be, hey, we want to make sure that, the music and the lights are perfect, and that we're not going to go too long, and we have the best coffee, and we have the best childcare, and we have to have this many services, and, it seems like we have better attendance when this happens, and you start focusing on attendance more than transformation. And then you even get to the point where you're starting to do things that may not necessarily be biblical in nature at all. You may be accepting of things that in nature, you're in God's scripture, you're really not supposed to accept. And that's where, when it says love others as yourself, that's where you probably need to have strong definitions of love, right? So even if it's like a family core value, like we're going to serve each other, you probably need to define serve so that the 5-year-old daughter, the mom, the grandpa, everybody can understand what that means. So in love, we're not saying accepting everyone as they are. And I know that seems kind of counterintuitive to love, but there's also an idea of love of like, hey, if I'm doing something really bad and harmful and I don't realize it, I do need somebody who loves me would point it out, right? If I'm, floating in a river and I'm having the best time of my life and I'm chilling out there with drinks and inner tube and there's a waterfall down the road, and by the time I'm going to see it, it's going to be too late and I can't paddle away. If somebody loves me, they're not going to just sit there and say, oh, he's having a good time. I don't want to, if there's kind of a confrontation, if I approach him, hey, Cam, it's good to see you, and waves and leaves me. Like that accepting my, the life that I'm living in ignorance right there is actually not loving because he's not saving me from the destruction of it. So what I'm saying by love is that to guide others in truth and light with gentleness and kindness. And the Bible refers to using gentleness and kindness when approaching others several times. So we're not berating each other. We're not just screaming at each other. We're not just, that's not what it's designed to. It's talking about guiding others, being prepared to give a reason for our hope to others with gentleness and kindness, meaning like I can guide them and love them and show them what God the Father expects us to do and to love each other in that way, not necessarily in the way of, I love you. I know you think certain things and we don't really agree with this concept of the Bible, but we're all going to get on stage and have a celebration every Sunday. I mean, there's just some issues there. So what I'm really trying to say is if you flex too much to the ways of the world, you're actually losing the biblical structural integrity to the church you're serving. So I want to clearly say this. There is no perfect church, okay? So you're not going to get to one who nails all the boxes and checks all the boxes. That's just not going to happen. So what happened, and that's why it's important to have some core values with your family and selecting a church of like, hey, I'm going to serve a church that's going to be biblically rooted no matter what, that everything that we do is going to be found in the Bible. However, there might be a couple things that's like, well, I may not necessarily agree with this exact statement of how the pastor said it, but I love the pastor and he loves me and I know he has good intentions. I'm going to approach him and we're going to have a conversation on it and we're going to try to see where the middle ground is, if it is, and then we'll move on. But if it ever gets to the point where like, hey, we're just saying things for an echo chamber and having a really, loud voice amplified by a bunch of people who agree with the same things, whatever it might be, that's not necessarily rooted, then you're kind of not even in a church anymore. You're just in a really popular, Sunday place that happens to play music and do some similar things, right? So just in that, what I want to say is just make sure we're discerning what our core values are and why our mission in the church, right? So talked about that. Let's see. There's another great biblical example in the Old Testament in the book of Daniel where we see people being flexible and adapting to a certain point and then all of a sudden drawing the line. It's one of the well-known stories in the Bible. It's about these 3 younger guys who actually work their way up and train to be, work up in essentially government and work for a pagan king, and his name's King Nebuchadnezzar. The guys' names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they are serving as high-ranking government administrators in the province of Babylon, working for King Nebuchadnezzar at this time. And all you really need to know about the king is he was not like, he did not share the faith with the 3 guys. He was not worshiping the God of Israel. He was worshiping his own God himself and some other things. So just know that they were flexing and bending enough to where they knew they could still be in God's will, but also be of the world. Because we're called to interact and be in the world. We're not called to conform in the world. So there is flexing and adapting when it comes to that, but at some point it goes too far. And what we see is Nebuchadnezzar starts making this massive 90-foot golden idol. I don't know if it's of himself, but he wanted everybody in the world, in his kingdom, to bow down to it when they played music and sounded trumpets and stuff. So And I know these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has been serving loyally to the king without compromising their loyalty to God, realized when they saw it being built, they're like, all right, this is the breaking point. I know what's going to happen here. Fellas, y'all ready for this? And they probably fist pump and say, yeah, it is what it is. Let's go. What happens is the king tells everyone to do it, and of course they don't, because there's we do not. God doesn't want any idols. He doesn't want any gods before him, and he wants that for us, not because he's selfish and egotistical. Because when we start serving other gods like money, sex, power, wealth, greed, comfort, whatever it might be, it always leads to our demise. So he knows what's best for us is actually for us to seek him. So when we see this, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this happens, the music goes off, and they stand up and they do not kneel, right? They don't bend the knee. King Nebuchadnezzar gets very frustrated, very upset, and said, the punishment for this is being thrown in a fiery furnace. So he actually gets so frustrated with them that he makes it 7 times hotter than normal, so hot that the guards that were stoking the fire and end up throwing those 3 guys in there die instantly. But this is the part that gives me chills of the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, do what you have to do. I'm going to serve my God no matter what. He may protect me from the circumstances, but even if he doesn't, I will be faithful to him and I will serve him. Incredible moment, because he's saying, I serve a God that is so big and so great that I trust so much that he may not change the circumstances the way I want him to on this earth, but I will serve him anyways. That is trust and faith in God. And in this situation, he blesses them with protection of the earthly consequences. They get thrown in the fire. 3 of them get thrown in there. King Nebuchadnezzar looks around. They're walking around, chilling, having the best time ever. But there is a 4th one with him. He says that must be the Son of God's. And that is going to be a reference of Jesus in all scriptures. But that's a podcast for another time as well. So then they walk out of there, and the king's like, I'm never messing with you guys again. This is something I cannot understand. The power's too great here. He gives a decree to the kingdom. Nobody mess with the guys. Do not say anything bad about them. So that's where we see they went to a point of like, hey, I'm not going to bend the knee. I'm not going to conform to the world. I'm not going to conform to the culture of this idol worshiping and fear mongering and whatever this is, because I stand on business. I stand on worshiping the God of Israel, a God that has pursued us relentlessly and created the world and heavens and earth, the all-powerful, the almighty. And I'm going to put my faith in that, not this little golden statue you're building. I'm not fearful of the consequences. So that's the point where they were bending so much, they were actually operating in a pagan government, still serving God, until the time came to say, that's enough. Enough is enough. So, and that's what, the big question I got to close with, and I ask myself, it's like, without defining the core values, without digging into the word, without understanding where we need to draw the line, we kind of conform, and we are not meant to conform to the world. And that's where having your non-negotiables is kind of the way I talked about it earlier. It's like, no matter what, you don't cross this line. You really have to have that in place. And if you're not thinking about it, if it's not a thought exercise in your mind every now and then, if you're not talking with some mentors about it, some mentors for your family, your workplace, your faith, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because you have to start thinking and processing this to almost kind of like get the mental reps before it happens. And it's also like a kind of a way to test and challenge your faith. It's like, hey, what, not necessarily what I do in that situation, but at some point, for me, if public education ever gets to a point where I really can't do what I'm called to do, am I faithful enough to walk away and handle the earthly consequences despite, and I might say, whether God saves my job or does whatever with my house, whatever it might be, am I going to be faithful to him, regardless of any earthly circumstances, any earthly consequences? And, that's the bend, don't break, is at some point we got to adapt and operate in this world, but we're not meant to conform to the world. So knowing that line, knowing where you can adapt, knowing when adapting is actually leading the mission even further, because we reach the people where they're at, and what loving people actually means, that is when you have set up those safeguards and the core values, and having the mission statement over your dining room table or whatever it might be. And that's an area I'm trying to grow in. And it's about family as well. Is I've thought about this, and I've made excuses not to do it, for us to sit down and say, hey, what does it mean for the Frasers? Like, what is our mission statement? What we're going to do as a family? What are the core values that we're going to strive? And even we stayed at a lake house with my brother, and they had they kind of mention it about like every time before they send their kids to somewhere, they say, hey, we're always going to be grateful, respectful, and thankful, or thankful, respectful, and grateful. And it was kind of like their kind of motto, like that's going to be those three things. And that's definitely biblically rooted when it comes to, I think it's in Thessalonians, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, rejoice always, and always be thanksgiving, or always be thankful. I'm butchering it. I should look it up. But anyways, definitely biblically rooted. But I just love that they do that. I was like, man, I really need to nail this down for my family as well. And anyways, it's going to apply to every element of your life, whether it's your algorithm of like, hey, you see yourself drifting at some point. What are your non-negotiables? Like, okay, I got to delete social media. Do I need to stop scrolling from this time to this time? Am I going to, if I'm trying to be the best dad that I can be, do I need to log down my phone and go do not disturb from 5 to 8? That's one of those that I actually do. So anyways, that's where I'm going to kind of close this down. I kind of add a couple just random side notes. If you got to this point, it's just going to be some funny random stuff. But man, like my little light back here went out. I'm trying to record with a better camera and process and light, and that's been more difficult to edit and do everything else. But anyways, I'm trying to do this stuff, and I'm realizing, man, why is it harder than everybody thinks? You think you can just click record and get going and upload and it's fine. But I'm really trying to grow in this area. If you've gotten to this point, I would really love it if you subscribe. I am trying to build up to the point where I can actually go live and do live Q&As and have more interactions with anybody who is willing. But my goal is I'm going to post at least weekly. The goal is to post daily across multiple platforms, but it's kind of difficult. You got to have that organization and kind of put a lot of things in place. So that's where this is going. That's where this is leading. Liking the solo method too, but I really do like having some guests on here. I have an idea for a couple mentors of mine to get on here and talk some leadership, just because it's kind of leadership junk. I like talking about it. So there's things I'm working on trying to build, but it's one of those things where it talks about the discipline. Like, this is when it gets hard, when it would be easy just to be like, all right, this is getting kind of hard. I'm going to try the next thing, which is going to be, streaming, whatever it might be. So it's one of those where like, hey, this is where I'm trying to be rigid. And, one of them with the newsletter, which is where kind of all this started, trying to create like a library of like the best, lessons I've learned from my kids, leaving it to them. And this is mainly because, I lost my grandparents and I found some stuff that they like hand wrote and had. I'm like, man, this is so awesome and incredible. And I'm like, I started writing, journaling every single day. And then it turned into more to eventually turn into the newsletter, which is about a 2,000 to 3,000 word essay. Almost, it is that every week. And it's like the biggest lessons that I could eventually save and maybe put into some kind of format to give to my kids and just to have it put on a shelf or whatever one day. And then to turn, another part of that mission is to reach others and help others, especially young, leaders of the household, young dads. I think that's where you change community is leadership in young men. And I've realized the fruit of that in my life when I've grown in that area of like what it does for the family, what it does for the people around me. And it's one of those where it's like, I found something shiny, I want to show other people. And that's what the power of kind of, leading with purpose and faith has done. But in short, the idea is to reach and help, others like I can, to serve others. And a lot of people don't want to read a 2,000 or 3,000 letter word essay every single Monday morning. But they do consume content. They consume podcasts. They consume short form content. So learning that, I'm working through an app called the Riverside. It's been pretty good. It does a pretty good job at recording and kind of breaking down shorts. I'm going to try to get like something to schedule out the posts, so maybe it can post a little bit more consistently each day. But that's where I am on the behind the scenes. Like, I'm trying to learn like lighting. I don't know if you can see all that and all this stuff. Like, my light goes out. I'm trying to, that's just part of it. The mic, I've had issues with this because there's like a touch button right here. And if you touch it, it goes out. And sometimes I touch it not meaning to. And I record a lot and I have to re-record. So anyways, guys, that's where I'm closing. Appreciate you listening along. Life is good. Make the most of it. Serve others. Find your core values and define your mission statement. What is your purpose, right? Why are you here? What are you designed to do? That answer will be in scripture. And if you have any questions on it, if you want to message me either on the email through the newsletter or like email me through the newsletter or on here, whatever, I will respond and help guide wherever I can. But your purpose is there. Define it in your life. What are your core values? What is going to be most important that you need to always be driving with, but also be flexible with to be able to adapt? What are your non-negotiables to the point of like, this is harmful for you, your family, your purpose, where you're going to draw the line. Think about those things. I think you will get better from it. I think it will help flesh out some ideas and probably limit frustrations at a later point. So anyways, guys, have a great week. We'll see you.